The tension in the crowded Eugene ballroom was thick as my father stood at the podium during his retirement party and casually announced he was handing the entire company to his new partner next week without even mentioning my 11 years of work there. My name is Harper Lee. I am 33 years old. His words hit me like ice because I had built the marketing division from nothing only to be erased in front of 150 guests. The painful silence when our eyes met confirmed the betrayal. That moment sparked something irreversible inside me. Before I dive deeper into how this night tore my world apart, if you've ever felt the sting of family pressure disguised as love, please give this a like and subscribe so more people can hear these stories. Drop a comment below with the city you are watching from. I really want to know you are out there too. That party had been in the works for 11 months with more than 150 guests from our circle in Eugene showing up to mark my father's decades in the business. My late mother had passed away 7 years ago, and ever since then, he had leaned hard on her memory to keep me in line. He would call me late at night and say things like, "Your late mother always dreamed of the company staying strong under trusted hands. You would not want to disappoint her now, would you?" His voice carried that quiet edge of guilt that made me feel small and selfish for even questioning him. I had poured everything into the marketing division since I was 28 years old, turning it into the main revenue driver for the family firm. Yet here he was, treating me like an afterthought, while his new partner, Ava Pierce, smiled from the sidelines like she already owned the place. My brother sat at the head table, nodding along as if nothing was wrong. He had always been the one who avoided conflict by agreeing with my father on everything. Later that evening, my colleague, Mason Reed, who had worked alongside me for 5 years, pulled me aside near the coat check. He kept his voice low and said, "Harper, I overheard your father talking with Ava Pierce about the transfer details, and it sounded like they were cutting you out of any real say." His words sent a chill through me because Mason was not the type to exaggerate. He had seen the numbers and the way my father had been shifting accounts quietly for the last 29 months. I thanked him and promised to look into it, but inside I already felt the ground shifting under my feet. Then my family friend Chloe Klein, who had known us since I was a teenager, came over with a worried expression. She squeezed my hand and whispered, Harper, check the partner's references on Ava Pierce. Something feels off and I do not want you to get hurt." Her warning hit me hard because Chloe had always been the one who noticed the little things my father tried to hide. I nodded and told her I would dig deeper. That night, after the guests left, I sat in my apartment replaying my father's announcement and the way he had looked right through me when I tried to pull him aside for a private word. He had simply patted my shoulder and said, "This is for the family. Harper, your late mother would have approved." The sarcasm in his tone was subtle, but it cut deep because it reminded me how he had used that same line for years to control every major decision in my life. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Evelyn Cole, who had handled our family matters for 18 years. She listened without interrupting as I explained the sudden transfer and the pressure to sign immediately. Evelyn's response was direct and sharp. Depending on the documents, this could be moved in a matter of days if he has the right signatures and access. She said, "But we can fight it if you act fast." Her words gave me the first real sense of power I had felt in months. I thanked her and then reached out to a private investigator named Logan Hayes, who came highly recommended for discreet work in the area. I gave him all the details I had, including Ava Pierce's background and my father's recent moves. Logan told me he could have surface findings in 7 days and deeper information after that. Those 7 days felt endless, as my father kept texting me reminders about the papers and how refusing would break the family legacy my late mother had helped build. My fiance, Brandon Tate, tried to play peacemaker during that time. He would say, "Your father only wants stability for everyone, Harper. Maybe you should just sign and avoid the drama." His comments made me pause because Brandon had always been supportive until recently when he started echoing my father's exact phrases. I started to wonder if the pressure was coming from more than one direction, but I pushed the thought aside and focused on what Logan might find. When the initial report arrived, it showed that Ava Pierce had been involved in a previous business deal with a man named Ethan Vance, who had lost substantial assets after a similar transfer. The pattern matched what was happening to me too closely for comfort. Logan noted that money had moved through a numbered company they shared, and emails suggested they were planning the same structure again. I printed the report and drove straight to my father's house that evening. My brother was there, which made the confrontation even harder. I laid the papers on the table and said, I know what you and Ava are trying to do, and I will not sign. My father looked at me with that calm expression he always wore when he was about to twist the knife. He leaned forward and said, You are being dramatic, Harper. Your late mother would turn over in her grave if she saw you putting yourself above the family like this. The jab landed exactly where he intended, and my brother stayed silent, just like he always did. The room felt smaller as I realized this was not a new plan, but something my father had been building for years through guilt and obligation. Chloe's whisper and Mason's warning had been right, but the real shock was still coming. I left that night with my heart pounding and a decision forming in my mind. I would gather more evidence and confront him properly with Evelyn and Logan by my side. Little did I know that the next piece of information from the investigator would change everything I thought I knew about my father and force me into a corner I never saw coming. 2 days later, the phone rang, and when I picked up, Logan's voice carried that careful tone investigators use when they know the news is going to shake your whole world. He had spent 8 full days cross checking every detail, and what he uncovered flipped everything I believed about my father on its head. It turned out Ava Pierce was not just a new business partner she had been in my father's life for 22 months, in a much more personal way, and the emails Logan managed to trace showed they were planning to marry quietly after the company transfer, then relocate to start fresh while leaving me and my brother with almost nothing. The major twist hit me like cold water because it explained why my father had been so insistent and why he had used my late mother's memory as a weapon for so long. Logan warned me the pattern matched exactly what had happened to Ethan Vance years earlier, where assets vanished overnight once the paperwork cleared. I sat in my living room, staring at the printed emails, feeling the room spin around me. My fiance Brandon walked in from his shift at the clinic and saw the papers spread across the table. He picked one up, read a few lines, and then looked at me with this disappointed expression that made my chest tighten. Harper, he said quietly, your father only wants what is best for everyone after everything he went through with your late mother. Maybe it is time to let go and avoid tearing the family apart. His words landed it like a second betrayal, because until that moment I had counted on him to stand with me. I tried to explain the evidence, but he just shook his head, saying, You are seeing conspiracies where there is only a man trying to move on. That same evening, my father called me himself, and the moment I answered, he launched straight into the attack without any greeting. Harper, I hear you have been poking around in things that do not concern you. He said, his voice smooth but edged with that familiar sarcasm that always made me feel 12 years old again. Your late mother spent 38 years building this company alongside me, and if you keep fighting this transfer, you will be the one spitting on her grave, not me. The jab was delivered so calmly it took my breath away because it was his favorite tactic, turning my grief into guilt and my questions into disloyalty. He demanded I come to the family house the next afternoon to sign the documents in front of everyone, and he made it clear that refusal would mean losing more than just the marketing division I had grown for 11 years. I agreed to the meeting because saying no right then would have given him even more ammunition, but my hands shook the whole drive over. When I arrived, my brother was already seated at the dining table, looking uncomfortable, yet saying nothing as usual. His wife, Sarah Mitchell, sat beside him, and I had always considered her an ally until she gave me this tight smile that told me she had already chosen sides. Ava Pierce was there too, positioned right next to my father, with her hand resting casually on his arm in a way that confirmed Logan's findings instantly. Chloe Klein had insisted on coming with me for moral support, and she squeezed my arm as we walked in, offering the quiet strength I needed. Mason Reed had texted me earlier promising he would back up anything I needed in writing, because he had seen the account shifts himself over the last 29 months. My father did not waste a second on pleasantries. He slid the thick folder across the polished wood and said, Sign these today, Harper, and stop acting like the victim when this is simply the natural next step for the family. The cutting remark stung because it dismissed every late night I had spent growing the client list and every sacrifice I had made while he played the grieving widower. My brother finally spoke up, then echoing my father, almost word for word. Sis, this is not personal. It is about protecting what our late mother left us, he said. But his eyes would not meet mine. Sarah added her own layers, saying, maybe you need to think about how your stubbornness is affecting Brandon too. We all want what is best. The pressure in the room thickened as my father leaned forward with that knowing look he always wore when he held all the cards. I pushed back as calmly as I could, pointing out the altered share documents Logan had flagged from my late mother's original trust. My father laughed softly, the sound sharp and dismissive. Those details were handled years ago, he said. And if you force my hand, Harper, I can make sure your personal savings accounts get reviewed next. Because family money has a way of staying in the family. The threat was veiled, but unmistakable, and it escalated everything because I realized my own modest investments from years of hard work could be next on the chopping block. Chloe tried to intervene, then saying the numbers do not add up, but my father turned on her immediately. This is family business, he snapped, and outsiders have no place telling me how to honor my late wife's legacy. The tension crackled as I felt the walls closing in tighter than ever. We argued back and forth for nearly 2 hours, with my father delivering one razor edged comment after another, always circling back to how disappointed my late mother would be, and how my refusal proved I had never really cared about the family. Each jab advanced his control, making me question my own memories of the years I had poured into the company. Mason's earlier warning and Chloe's support kept me steady, but the emotional weight was crushing. By the time I left the house without signing anything, my mind was racing with the realization that this was not just about the business. It was about my father rewriting our entire history to suit his new life with Ava. That night, I met with Evelyn Cole at her office downtown and laid out every new detail, including the personal emails and the threat to my savings. She listened carefully, then said, this changes the legal landscape. Harper, we can freeze the transfers, but it will require going public with the evidence, and that means a very ugly fight. Her words gave me a flicker of hope, but also highlighted how much I stood to lose. The next morning, Logan sent one final file that made my blood run cold because it showed my father had already started the paperwork to redirect funds from my personal retirement account using an old family power of attorney I thought had expired. The discovery forced me to face the fact that the coercion had reached into every corner of my life. Just when I thought the situation could not get any darker, my father sent a text giving me 48 hours to sign, or he would move forward with legal action that could leave me with nothing. The ultimatum hung over me like a storm cloud, and I knew the real confrontation was coming fast. What I did not realize yet was how deeply this choice would cost me in ways no amount of evidence could fix. The 48 hours ticked down like a countdown I could not stop, and I spent every minute of them locked in Evelyn Cole's downtown office with Logan Hayes going over the thick stack of evidence we had compiled. Chloe Klein stayed right by my side the whole time, offering quiet encouragement while Mason Reed sent over additional account records he'd risked his own position to copy for me. The hidden truth that came out in those final files hit harder than anything else because it turned out my brother had known about Ava Pierce's real role for almost 22 months and had even helped my father draft the initial transfer language to keep me in the dark. Logan laid the emails on the table and said, this proves coordinated intent, Harper, but the documents are ironclad unless we get them to admit it on record. My stomach dropped because the betrayal ran deeper than I had let myself believe, and it forced me to see how isolated I truly was in my own family. I decided then that the only way forward was a direct confrontation at the family house the next afternoon, with everyone present, so there could be no more denials. Evelyn agreed to come as my legal witness, and Logan promised to record discreetly from the next room if things turned ugly. When I pulled into the driveway, my hands would not stop shaking. But I reminded myself this was the moment I had to choose myself, even if it cost everything. My brother met me at the door with that same uncomfortable expression he had worn for weeks, and his wife Sarah gave me a pitying look that made my skin crawl. Ava Pierce sat beside my father at the dining table, looking perfectly composed like she already belonged there. Chloe and Mason arrived right behind me for support, and Evelyn followed, carrying the folder that held our last hope. My father did not even wait for us to sit down before he initiated the attack with that calm, cutting tone he had perfected over decades. Harper, he said you have wasted enough of everyone's time with these paranoid stories. And if you force this meeting, you are only proving how selfish you have become since your late mother passed. The jab landed exactly where he wanted it, slicing through the grief I had carried for 7 years and turning it back on me like a weapon. He slid the final transfer papers across the table and demanded I sign them immediately, adding that refusing would mean he had no choice but to freeze my personal retirement accounts, which had grown from my 11 years of work. My brother nodded along, saying, Sis, this is the only way to honor what our late mother built. In fighting it will just hurt you more. Sarah piled on with a sharp remark about how my stubbornness was already driving Brandon away, and maybe I should think about that before burning every bridge. The room grew thick with tension as I laid out the evidence Logan had uncovered, including the emails that showed my father and Ava planning their quiet marriage and relocation once the company was safely in their names. My father laughed softly, the sound sharp and dismissive as always. Those are private conversations, he said, and you have no right digging into my life after everything I sacrificed to raise you. He turned to Evelyn then and said, This is a family matter, not some courtroom drama, and if you push this, your client will lose far more than a marketing division she never truly owned. The threat was delivered so smoothly it sent a chill through me because I saw in that moment how prepared he had been all along. Chloe tried to speak up, reminding everyone of the numbers that did not add up, but my father shut her down instantly, telling her outsiders had no place interfering in how he honored his late wife's legacy. Logan stepped in from the side room, then revealing the recording and the additional proof of the forged power of attorney. But my father simply leaned back with that knowing smile. He said, You can record whatever you want, Harper, but the courts in this state will side with the original trust documents I had drawn up years ago, and your late mother signed them herself. Evelyn argued back, pointing out the inconsistencies, yet the more she spoke, the clearer it became that the legal path would drag on for years, draining every resource I had left. Mason offered to testify about the account shifts he had witnessed, but my father countered with a razor edged remark about disloyal employees who bite the hand that feeds them, and I saw Mason's face fall because he knew his own job could be next. The confrontation stretched for over 3 hours, with my father delivering one incisive jab after another, always circling back to guilt and obligation until I felt the fight draining out of me. In the end, the painful choice became clear, and I made it right there at that table, knowing it would cost me everything I had built. I signed a limited version of the papers that gave up my share of the company, but protected my personal savings from immediate seizure because fighting further would have left me bankrupt and completely cut off from any remaining family ties. My father watched me sign with satisfaction in his eyes and said, See, Harper, that was not so hard. Was it your late mother would finally be proud? The words burned because they confirmed he had won completely, and the irreversible consequence settled over me like lead. My brother looked relieved, yet would not meet my eyes, and Ava simply smiled without a word, as if the matter had never been in doubt. Brandon called me later that same night to say he could not stay with someone who tore her family apart, and that was the final piece of the defeat I had not seen coming. I left the house that evening with nothing but the clothes I wore and a heavy heart that has not lightened in the months since. The company transfer went through exactly as my father planned, and he married Ava 3 months later in a quiet ceremony I was not invited to attend. My brother and his wife have not spoken to me since that day, choosing to stay in the life my father rebuilt around them, and the family friend circle I once knew has slowly faded away. Chloe and Mason reached out a few times, offering support, but the isolation grew anyway because choosing myself meant walking away from the only world I had ever known. I took a modest job at a small marketing firm across town, far from the family business and the life I had poured 11 years into, and every morning I wake up wondering if the fight was worth the silence that now fills my days. Looking back, I realized the deepest lesson in all of this is that sometimes the cost of choosing yourself is higher than anyone warns you, And the people who use guilt as a chain rarely let go without taking pieces of you with them. My father remains untouched, stronger than ever with his new life and his control intact, while I carry the weight of the choice that saved my dignity but left me standing alone. Real strength sometimes looks like walking away with empty hands and a quiet regret that never fully fades. Thank you for listening to my story and for staying with me through every painful twist. If you have ever faced a choice where winning meant losing everything you once loved, drop a comment below and tell me how you found the courage to keep going anyway. I read every single one.